Hello, my dear friends. How are you? I'm Mario Ferrier, and today I'm going to talk about runes and casting bones for divination purposes in pre-Christian Scandinavia. Well, this video wasn't planned, but it was a recent question by one of my patrons, which, I thought I should share and develop a little bit more to demystify some common misconceptions concerning the runes. Because the question was actually about if the runes were carved on bones and used as a divination method. Well, I think this will be a rather short video and most likely disappointing, sorry. I know how some of you may feel because in the past I have also researched the veracity of this method and how it has been portrayed in movies in which the stereotypical northern filthy looking barbarians make an appearance and then they cull some old crone to cast the bones. Often these bones have runic inscriptions which have inspired modern pagans to make their own bones with runic inscriptions for divination methods or divination purposes. And also film producers themselves also get inspiration from these modern new age religious manifestations. So it's the same cycle of inspiration, and both sides didn't bother to look at history and archaeology for inspiration. As I've pointed out on other videos, divination alone with runes isn't something we know for sure. There are no evidences that prove that runes were used for divination. Tacitus spoke of divination done by a specific Germanic tribe, but he spoke of lots of sticks or staves with markings on them, but he doesn't give any detail on the markings. And this was assumed to be the runes, but the period which Tacitus refers to is before the runes were introduced to Germanic people. So it isn't likely that the runes were being used for divination methods. Besides, the runes are introduced to Germanic peoples as a written form, a new written form to them. And until at least the 5th century, there are many developments in this new form of writing among several Germanic peoples. And the knowledge of the runes, how to write with them and their developments was not something everyone had access to. So it took a very long time for the runes to be considered an ordinary and even familiar written form among Germanic peoples. So it isn't likely that the runes were ever used for divination purposes. Divination with runes is something that got a lot more attention in the 1980s, 20th century, among some New Age esoteric schools. Besides, divination methods and meanings with the runes are an adaptation from the tarot. I've made a video explaining all of this, in case you haven't seen it yet, concerning the common misconceptions about the runes and their use, also including divination. So you can check it right here, but I will also place the links to other videos, which you may find important, in the description of this video. But anyway, let's develop this a little bit more, shall we? Please. Alright, casting bones. It's a cast or a shell frequently made from plaster or fiberglass to stabilize and hold the broken bones to facilitate the healing process. Okay, alright, that was a bad joke. So, carving runes on bones and using them for divination. Not likely. Nowadays, many people and many companies sell such products of animal bones with runes carved on them, or rune sets made of animal bones, or several different bones, especially jaw and ribs, with symbols usually understood to be Viking, but are in fact from the 17th century, mainly Icelandic magical staves, symbols from the period or after the period of the consolidation between magic traditions of both the East and the West. And such symbols, such as the Veikvisir and the Egishjalmur, are and others are actually influenced by Judeo-Christian traditional folk magic, the Kabbalah, and the occult, right? And not from a pagan tradition. Now, this doesn't mean that in pre-Christian Scandinavia, people were not using bones or carving runes on bones. One thing is divination by using bones in which runes were carved on those bones, and I repeat, there are no evidences for that. And another completely different thing is using bones for both tools and utensils and carving runes on them to deliver a message, but not for magical purposes. For instance, writing the name of the owner of the tool or a specific meaningful phrase. But of course, there are many objects from the Nordic Middle Ages of several materials, not just bone, in which runes were indeed carved on them, entire phrases even, and many of them enter in the category of talismans or charms. So there's a magical purpose to them, mostly apotropaic in intention, but neither for divination purposes nor the runes themselves used to manifest a magical action, but the runes instead used as a writing system, just a written form with the intention to express the purpose of the charm or the talisman. For instance, not the runes giving protection by themselves, but the runes used to write the intention of the protection and to whom this protection is intended for. No worries, I have made a video about talismans in Norse witchcraft, and you can check that for yourself, as I have developed this subject in more depth in that video. So, I think we got to the conclusion that runes were not used for divination purposes in pre-Christian and medieval Scandinavia, nor were they carved on bones and using the bones with runes for divination or other oracular purposes. But now, in terms of bones, that's another matter. Certainly not used with runes carved on them, but it is possible that bones may have been used in divination methods in pre-Christian Scandinavia, as it wasn't something that uncommon in the pagan past among other cultures and several civilizations. The problem is that we do not find such things in archaeology, as both human and animal osteological remains easily disappear, as they are, of course, perishable materials. But we do find bones in Viking Age graves, for instance, or a preserved body here and there from the Iron Age, mostly bog bodies. And there's always material culture accompanying or associated to the deceased, but to my knowledge, no bones that might give us indication of an oracular art. Bones accompanying the deceased are usually body parts of another individual, another human individual, maybe part of an arm, a jaw, or a different head, but mostly, in most cases, are also specific animal parts. It varies greatly, but none show evidences related to an oracular art for any divination method. We do have, however, that one account in Erik's Saga Rauda of the soothsayer, the Volva, the prophetess, having a pouch where she carries her charms. Now, this, of course, is very vague, but it could be bones in that pouch, but could also be stones or other materials. Charms in Old Norse context could be many things. As I have said, I have done a video about charms and talismans in pre-Christian Scandinavian witchcraft. Check it in the description of this video. But the case in Erik's Saga Rauda is curious nonetheless, and the Volva Thorbjörg, the prophetess Thorbjörg, carrying charms in her pouch. Now, the account itself describes the content of the pouch simply as tofur, which indeed we could translate to charms, but whatever they were or might have been and for which purpose, we do not know. The soothsayer comes to perform a Seder ceremony. Her divinatory powers are required by a small community, but the entire performance does not mention the casting of bones whatsoever, nor any other item for the purpose of divination. If you allow me, for more information concerning this account in Eric's Saga Rauda, I have done a video in relation to the song Vardlokkur, as well as the Seder performances for divination purposes, the assistance of the vulva, of the soothsayer, and the songs. So you can check that in more detail in that video, but no mention of bone casting, nothing of it. In fact, there are no surviving written sources from the Nordic Middle Ages, nor archaeological evidences yet to support the idea of casting bones for divination or any oracular purposes among the Norse and other Northern Europeans throughout the Middle Ages, at least not related to bones. I'll put here on the screen a couple of Old Norse sources you can check for yourself, and I find these to have the best detailed information about divination methods in Northern Europe. Sources from the 10th to the 14th century. You will find in those sources soothsaying, clairvoyance, fortune-telling, prophecy, Seder ceremony, second sight, you name it. None ever mention the use of bones for any oracular or divination purpose. At least in the Nordic Middle Ages, it doesn't seem that bones were ever used for divination. But in an earlier period, it might have happened. Let's see. The use of bones as talismans or charms in Northern Europe appear in later sources of the modern period, mostly 17th century onwards, but the great majority of cases are in fact from the 19th century records of witchcraft, trolldom, and folk magical traditions. These became quite popular in modern witchcraft due to the use of bones as talismans or charms within the Catholic traditions. Especially finger bones from saints that became quite the profitable market for many people, selling finger bones of a specific saint, one single individual, to the point that you would think the saint must have had hundreds of hands. Of course, bones, be that of humans or animals, have been used as talismans and also charms throughout the ages, but not specifically for divination purpose. We shall see that. As I said, most likely in the account of Eric's Saga Rauda, since this soothsayer, this prophetess, is described as having rich paraphernalia, her charms or talismans may have been metal plaques, maybe with inscriptions on them, but I think that may be pushing it a little bit too far. The likely scenario here would be stones and indeed bones of specific animals, since in that same account it is specifically mentioned that before the Seder ceremony, the vulva, the prophetess, asks for a special meal made entirely of different animals' hearts. So it would not be far-fetched the soothsayer having bones in her pouch, but they are referred to as charms, tofr, and rightly so. Other accounts of spiritual leaders, soothsayers, prophetesses, shamans, etc. from other cultures, specific animals are often sacrificed to aid the performer into contacting with supernatural entities or the tutelary spirits by the use of the sacrificial or the sacrificed animal. Some graves of various pre-Christian contexts also present animal parts, some of which seem to represent specific religious motifs and a belief in the afterlife. Some animal parts or entire animals seem to serve as the vehicles for the transportation of the spirit of the deceased into the afterlife, or being animals representative of a specific deity or cult to that deity. And as such, the idea is to send the deceased to that deity or specific afterlife realm governed by that deity. Other contexts represent cremation of both the deceased and animals, which may indicate the belief of the human deceased and the animal becoming one through the process of transformation by fire. And as such, the deceased retains the specific qualities of the animal or the animals burnt alongside the deceased. But again, these do not show any link to divination methods. Now, oracle bones with inscriptions, and I repeat, oracle bones with inscriptions on them, is an Asian tradition, mostly Chinese, but it is entirely possible others may have done so, or perhaps just casting bones alone without inscriptions, but we shall see this further ahead. But in Asian traditions, oracle bones would often contain questions written on them and would be thrown into the fire and the answer revealed from the ashes. But we shall get to that in a moment as well. Now, I would like to also point out that I've made 2 videos about divination in the Germanic cultural world, so not just for Scandinavians, but other geographical areas of Germanic context, cultural context. And in my entire research, I haven't found any source speaking about the casting of bones, not even in archaeological reports of Germanic context, at least for divination purposes. I'll have those 2 videos by the end of this one, as well as the links in the description. The only common European tradition of using bones for divination purposes or methods that we truly know of is the use of spiel bones, shoulder blades, right? Which were examined after the slaughter of an animal. In here we enter in the divination art of Scapulemancy, as being specifically the practice of divination by the use of scapulae, or spiel bones, shoulder blades. Within Scapulemancy, we have 2 forms. One of them is called apyromantic, which is the use of an animal's shoulder blades, post-slaughter, of course, for divination purposes, examining the bones. But there aren't detailed sources on how this was done other than examining the spiel bones. This is a specific art which, to my knowledge, has survived until today, at least among Greeks in very remote rural areas. It is done by cleaning the scapulae, the shoulder blades, cleaning of any remaining flesh, lifting it up to the light, and interpret the various shadowy bits showing on the transparent part of the bone, right? If I'm not mistaken, if there are no shadows in the bone, in the transparent part, it is a good omen, a favorable omen. Scapulemancy was one of the divination arts actually forbidden during the European Middle Ages, so it's understandable why there aren't a lot of evidences, not even written sources about it. So we must rely on archaeology, but mostly this is found in Southern Europe, especially in classical civilizations, let's say, as some of these bones were also found near temples. So divination through shoulder blades and the performance sometimes done in temples, which may show some connection with the divine or requiring divine intervention. But mostly this art survived in remote rural areas of the Mediterranean. So it's quite possible that in Northern Europe this might have been done as well, but no evidences so far. Now, as I was saying, there is a second form of scapulemancy, which is pyromantic, the opposite of apyromantic. As the name indicates, it is the burning of the spiel bones, the shoulder blades, and making an interpretation of the results. But this seems to have been a method more often practiced among Eastern Asians and Native American peoples as well. Spiel bones, shoulder blades are the only types of bones we know for sure that have been used for divination methods when it comes to using bones for that. And in European context, mostly in the Mediterranean. But since Scandinavians were never truly isolated, it's possible that scapulemancy might have been a divination method used in Scandinavia, as there are several evidences, a ton of evidences actually, of contact between Scandinavians and Southern Europe and other places of the world since prehistoric times. But of course, we must not forget that casting bones for divination purposes is also a reality in many African cultures. And that's very curious because this idea of casting bones for divination purposes became quite famous in neo-pagan contemporanean religious manifestations and constructions, mostly within Wicca, actually, mostly American Wicca, borrowing this tradition of casting bones for divination mainly from Native American peoples, but also from voodoo, but also other African cultural influences, of course. And I find it very curious that in Scandinavia, since the 80s, voodoo has been growing in Scandinavian folk magic. And in the 2000s, until our day, and until now, and with the growing immigration of various peoples from Africa, especially from Nigeria and Ghana, Scandinavians have been incorporating and adopting a lot of African magical religious factors into their folk magic. So lately, in many Scandinavian megalithic sites, for instance, as an example, it is often found several evidences of modern voodoo rituals of syncretic origin. And I find this curious because this is another factor that proves what I've said on the previous video about the evolution of magic and folk traditions in Scandinavia and thousands and thousands of years of cultural syncretism and syncretic faiths. And it never stopped. It's still evolving nowadays with more cultural exchanges. So indeed, it's no coincidence that divination by the casting of bones is such a famous subject among many neo-pagan religious manifestations, especially within Wicca, as such manifestations are indeed cultural and religious syncretisms. And even voodoo itself, it is a creolized syncretic religion with an intricate set of beliefs and rituals originating from Dahomey, Congo, Yoruba, and of course other African ethnic groups, and taken to the New World through the Atlantic slave trade, and sometimes influenced by or practiced jointly with Christianity. But that's a subject for another time. Anyway, if there was indeed a divination method by the use of bones in pre-Christian Scandinavia, well, it might have been Scapulemancy, with shoulder blades. Not to be confused with necromancy. Necromancy isn't a divination art by the use of human bones. Alright, my dear friends, I hope you have enjoyed yet another video, a short one this time. Thank you so much for watching, see you on the next video, and as always, up for it. Thanks for today.